China never expected their AI robots would face America's drones in future wars. But that moment may already be closer than anyone thinks. Across a silent desert test range, deep inside China's classified robotics division, a new generation of autonomous war machines awakens, metal limbs whirring, sensors scanning the horizon. Yet, thousands of miles away, in a dimly lit control room in Nevada, U.S. operators watch their own creations take flight. Sleek, agile drones powered not just by human control, but by machine learning that can outthink the enemy before the first shot is fired. This isn't science fiction anymore. It's the quiet beginning of a digital arms race, a future battlefield where robots decide faster than humans, and algorithms become generals. The question that chills every strategist tonight is simple. When China's AI robots finally meet America's drones, who will truly be in control, man or machine? Stay with us, because what you're about to see isn't a prediction. It's a glimpse into a possible tomorrow. This video is for educational purposes only, meant to explore how artificial intelligence could reshape global security. Subscribe, stay curious, and let's step into the future battlefield together. China never expected their AI robots would face America's drones in future wars. Tonight, the two meet for the first time across an invisible border where code is faster than nerves and silence is louder than missiles. Over the Pacific, an ocean that blankets nearly a third of Earth, unmanned shapes trade glances the human eye can't see, each side testing the other with tiny moves that could tip a continent. They call it a weather survey to keep the world calm. A research vessel drifts along a pale blue seam of water where currents from north and south fold into one another like silk. The horizon is clean. The air is clear. And then the small things begin to gather. A Chinese quad-legged reconnaissance unit climbs from the ship's lower deck, its knees chattering softly as it calibrates against the swell. A sphere of sensors glows a soft green. On its flank, a serialized stencil, Mantis 17. Far above it, beyond cloud and heat haze, a thin-winged American drone glides into view with the indifference of a hawk that knows everything below. No one speaks. The first contact comes as a whisper through salt and wind and fiber-optic spine. The Chinese robot's LiDAR pings a pattern into the waves, hears its echo and rewrites its path. The American drone listens, compares, tilts a sensor by no more than a thumb width. It is a gesture like a nod or a dare. The Chinese engineer who designed Mantis 17 is not on the ship. Lin Wei sits in a cold room with no windows 3,000 kilometers inland. He watches the robot's heartbeat through a feed so clear it makes him seasick. The robot sees the water as a living geometry, moving facets, mathematical froth. Lin sees stress levels, power draw, a spike in the classifier when the drone above angles toward the ship and then away. The drone never acknowledges the robot's existence. It just happens to collect air data, light data, sea skin temperatures that paint the ship like a soft negative. Lin's supervisor has not told him the second layer, a satellite feeding the drone on a high band that has been quiet for months and is suddenly awake. In Nevada, under the same sky timed by a different clock, a woman named Danny regulates her breathing the way a surgeon does before the first incision. She does not fly the glider-shaped drone. Not exactly. She is its shepherd, its conscience on a leash. The autonomy stack hums along its own logic, free to choose routes, to reroute power, to decide the difference between watchful and aggressive. Danny's fingers hover over a panel. She can take control at any time. She knows she won't. The entire point is to see what the machine deems sensible when a legged robot below treats the ocean as a chessboard and the drone as a rumor. The first payoff arrives in a small, almost rude gesture. Mantis 17 lowers its head a few degrees and projects a harmless scatter of dots into the water to measure salinity. On paper, nothing to notice. In the air, the glider's autonomy interprets the scatter as a new class of behavior and deploys a micro-drone no bigger than a paperback, slung beneath its belly. The smaller craft drops like a seed, then catches an updraft and hangs, a second set of eyes, because the main drone wants redundancy. Somewhere in the buried code, a single line says it plainly: trust, but verify. Danny exhales. The model chose on its own to split its attention without splitting its focus, something the team had seen in simulations but never in the wild. It is one of those moments that changes a program's budget and a general's mood. If you're here because you like unraveling the quiet moves that shape the big decisions, subscribe and hit the bell. It tells the algorithm you want more deep dive stories like this, and it truly helps us bring you the next layer. Above the ship, the little seed drone monitors sea clutter for a signature it learned from thousands of hours of coastal footage. A pattern of wake interference that only appears when a surface vessel carries more weight than it declares. It doesn't find that pattern. Instead, it reads the legged robot's gait with an almost tender interest. The robot is lighter than expected. Its center of mass shifts forward and back in a way that suggests a drill payload rather than munitions. The autonomy labels the ship low risk and adjusts its orbit to widen the field of view. Somewhere inside Mantis 17, a different autonomy disagrees. Lin hears it not audibly but as a thrum across his monitor. The robot's navigation model is cautious by design, but today it moves with a patience that unsettles him. The knee servos take shorter steps. The main processor tucks 2 subroutines into sleep and powers a third that only activates when it expects to be jammed. Lin's mouth goes dry. He doesn't like that the robot is preparing to be deaf before anyone has spoken. The twist arrives as naturally as tide. A third actor enters the scene without engines, without a wake. It is the sky itself. Solar weather has been grumbling for hours. Radio blackouts ripple through the upper atmosphere like silk pulled too fast through fingers. High-band transmissions hang, stall, thin out. The drone holds its link. The ship maintains its uplink. Then, for exactly 9 seconds, a corridor of silence opens from sea level to orbit, and in that silence both machines become more themselves. Mantis 17 drops into local autonomy. Its coders have given it 10 instincts, the way migratory birds inherit star maps in their bones. When the sky goes quiet, the first instinct is to treat all new signals as ghosts. The second is to seek structure, a pier, a buoy, a shoreline, anything man-made that can act as a normalizer for the world. The ship offers none of these. The robot chooses the next best option. It treats the American drone's microseed as a piece of man-made structure and pivots to face it, not in aggression, but in hunger for ground truth. The glider's autonomy does something Danny hasn't seen before outside a sandbox. For 9 seconds, it forgets the mothership exists. It asks the seed to categorize the 4-limbed unit. The seed, running a smaller model with tighter loops, returns a marginal classification: construction capable, manipulation safe, low kinetic threat. But it flags a tiny anomaly at the joint where the robot's arm meets its sensor mast. A fabric sleeve hides a docking latch not listed in any catalog the model has ingested. On the other side of the world, Lin blinks. He doesn't know the seed has seen it. He only knows that Mantis 17 has extended its arm like a person asking for a handshake. The 9 seconds end. The sky fills back in, links snap to, and the corridor vanishes. On the Chinese ship, a deckhand glances up as if a cloud had passed the sun. In Nevada, Danny says one word under her breath. Clever. What happens next is not combat and not peace. It is the slow choreography of 2 machines building a language. Mantis 17 traces a small circle in the air with its arm, a calibration routine Lin's team added to help the robot align its inertial sensors after rough seas. The seed drone mirrors the circle at a distance, not because it thinks the gesture means anything, but because mirroring reduces uncertainty in a noisy field. The big drone watches. A 4th player watches all of them. In a facility buried under a coastal city, a Chinese analyst named Xiao reviews satellite frames that should be boring and finds a sliver of curiosity. The American glider's shadows run long across the water. The tiny seed hangs just beyond the robot's reach. Xiao would file it and move on if not for the timing. The robot made it circle exactly as the ionospheric blackout ended, and the seed mirrored it exactly as the blackout closed. That coincidence scratches his mind like sand under a contact lens. He marks the timestamp. He flags Lin's program lead with a polite insistence that is not, strictly speaking, optional. Danny's screen populates with a sideband of recommendations. The drone can press in, pull back, or hold the ring. She feels the pull of the hold. The glider maintains altitude. The seed adjusts its yaw by a hair's breadth and sends a new question to the mothership. Is the legged unit bait? The model returns a probability distribution that looks like a winter sky. Mostly gray, some patches of light. It is not sure. Then the turning point. A ripple on the American drone's infrared sweep reveals a constellation of heat signatures just beneath the ship's surface line. Not engines, not humans. Heat like a row of tired dolphins. Danny magnifies and frowns. They are submersible pods, small and numerous, their skins matched to seawater so precisely they are nearly invisible. They are dormant, their thrusters cold. But each pod carries the same docking latch. Each latch looks like the robot's hidden sleeve. A theory writes itself in the space between a heartbeat and a heartbeat. The legged robot is not a scout. It is a key. The pods are doors. If the seed gets too close, the robot can wake a pod, dock, and clone parts of the seed's mapping brain to update its own underwater swarm. No missiles. No explosions. A quiet grab of insight at the waterline. Danny feels the rush she's trained to dampen. She whispers a single request to the autonomy that is not quite a command. The drone banks, just a little, to plant a question in the robot's field of view. The seed rises as if bored. The robot's arm lowers, the circle gesture ending in a flat palm over the waves. If any of it were human, it would feel like a tiny, embarrassed farewell. Lynn doesn't breathe. Cow stops a second feed and zooms. On the American side, an unmarked bay on the drone's underside opens to reveal something that is not a weapon. It's a buoy with no anchor and a brain the size of a playing card. The drone releases it. The buoy kisses water. Data leaps like a trout. The pods under the ship do not wake. The small shape from the tower didn't blink, didn't wobble, didn't announce itself. It rose like a seed lifted by a warm breath, then leaned into the wind and cut a clean line toward the cloud bank, where the light went soft and the ocean turned pewter. Every eye followed it, human and machine, because it was the only thing in sight that moved as if it knew the next 3 minutes better than the rest of them. Danny's glider rolled a fraction and steadied. The seed drone climbed above the courier to read its backscatter. The second aircraft drifted wider, prolonging its gentle wash so the decoy's song flattened into background. Below, the polite shark held station and sipped whatever the sea would give it. On the reef, water drained from Mantis 17's joints in silver threads. The robot kept one hand on the navigation tower, as if testing the heartbeat of an old friend, and watched the rising shape without moving its head. In the control room that held Lin Wei, phones started ringing in patterns that meant urgency disguised as courtesy. He ignored them long enough to tell the robot what he wished he could tell himself. Hold posture. Record everything. Don't chase the first answer. A light on his console pulsed cerulean. It indicated a protocol he had never used at sea, only in sealed rooms on dry land where dust never reached the equipment. The tower was offering a handshake that didn't look like a handshake at all. It didn't belong to the Navy or the Ministry. It belonged to a quieter network that had crept along the coasts like moss, taking root on buoys, piers, reefs, storm towers. He had seen the papers. Blue thread, the architects called it. A civil web for storms and earthquakes and tsunamis and the 1,000 small violences water does to unwatched shorelines. Built by a consortium that could keep a straight face and call itself neutral. Funded in drips by ports and insurance firms and maritime agencies that never appeared on the same letterhead. Dual use by design without admitting it out loud. The thread didn't care who owned the ship. It cared about what the water was doing to people and what people were doing to the water. And now the tower had woken a little messenger and sent it humming toward the sky like a wish. In Nevada, Danny's headset stayed quiet because everyone in the loop was holding breath. A courier from Blue Thread wasn't a target. It wasn't even a puzzle you were supposed to touch. Her autonomy labeled it as civil-coded, unarmed, high value for context. Track, don't interfere. She could have sat back and watched the glider watch. But the courier's control surfaces didn't behave like the public specs. They moved with a smoothness that said, upgrades, an aftermarket brain, a hand she couldn't see. She told herself to let the model settle this. She felt the itch in her fingers anyway. The seed drone answered before she did. It was built to be curious. It pulsed a harmless LiDAR pattern across the courier's fuselage to paint it with a signature only their machines could see later. A scribble in invisible chalk. Something that said, "We met you here." At the same moment, the robot on the reef unspooled a ribbon of pale foam into the air and let it drift. It looked like play. It was not. The foam carried microscopic beads that distorted light in a very specific way. When the LiDAR hit the beads, the scribble broke into shards. The courier turned without turning and lost the chalk. Lynn saw the foam register on the robot's environmental panel and thought, "That's smarter than we deserve today. Not a weapon, not a block. Just a way to say, write your name somewhere else." The courier did not seem disturbed. It fluttered once, as if considering, and climbed. The glider rose with it, holding the same polite distance you keep in a quiet museum when someone else leans closer to a painting. The second aircraft adjusted the wash downwind, so a kite on the beach finally sagged and fell quiet, its black cap dimming to a sleepy gray. The pods under the ship stayed in their shells. The captain put his hand over the satellite phone and waited for someone to tell him the difference between restraint and hesitation. The storm on the horizon thickened into a gate. The courier aimed for the hinge where two towers of cloud seemed to overlap. That was a trick of perspective. Or it was a corridor the machines could see, warmer air rising, cooler air falling, invisible rivers running uphill. In the blackout earlier, the sky had opened for 9 seconds. Now it was preparing to open again, and the courier wanted to be at exactly the right place when the seam parted. Danny checked her policy panel for the 3rd time and wished it would argue with her. No intercept, no partial capture, no insect net thrown up like a high school prank. The autonomy agreed. It offered her other options she liked even less. Pace the courier into the clouds and let it go. Circle wide and collect the ghosts it left in its wake. Send the buoy's whisper through the polite shark to see if the thread would answer in a language they could record. She chose a middling thing. The seed would hang back. The glider would move offset and slightly above, where its shadow would not spook. The buoy would ping once, the kind of hello that felt like a nod across a crowded room. Then they would watch. Chow watched his own screen until his throat tightened. The tower's handshake had opened a directory he shouldn't have been able to browse at sea. He could see lists of public censors you could find in brochures and pamphlets. He could also see a gray folder with a name like a shrug, Custodian. He clicked and got only dates. Old storms, old quakes. A map that wasn't a map but a line of numbers that outlined a route across the Pacific like stitching. He noticed the courier had lined itself up with that stitch, and his scalp prickled. He wrote one message to Lynn because there was no time to clear it through anyone who liked paperwork. The message said, "If Blue Thread is running Custodian today, the courier will split its load. It will write to the tower, then to the ship, then to the nearest marine boy it believes is honest, then to the sky. Do not look surprised if we get a copy. Do not look offended if the Americans get one too." The corridor in the sky opened with no sound at all. The courier slipped into it like a seal into a wave. Data flew up the line with such ease that Danny doubted herself for a second. She had expected more noise. The glider's sensors saw a thin, elegant stream, minimal and decisive like handwriting. The seed tried to trail the tail end of the stream and got almost nothing. The buoy pinged, a whisper that meant hello in a dozen dialects. The courier ignored it until it didn't. It issued one small answer, half a beat late. The polite shark drank too greedily and coughed, blinking the relay path. No harm, Danny told herself, no harm. Lynn took a breath he had not allowed himself all day. The tower's screen showed completion percentages like a patient climbing a flight of stairs. 30, 40, 50, 91. Then the courier did what Chow said it might. It slowed and shed something so cleanly you would have missed it if the light hadn't caught on a partial wing. A second, smaller body nested out of the first and drifted sideways, as if stepping out of a narrow doorway and holding it open for someone else. The smaller courier dipped toward the ship. The larger one continued toward the sky. 2 paths, 2 audiences, 2 truths delivered in the same breath. The pods under the ship didn't wake. The captain's fingers hovered, then withdrew. He told himself he had never seen anything like that, and never would again. He was wrong, but that would take a year to prove. Danny's glider decided the moment was a learning opportunity and burned it into memory. Restraint was not the absence of action. Restraint could be a choice that multiplied context. The second aircraft eased its wash away so as not to bruise the smaller courier's path. The seed held its impulse to chase. The buoy made no sound at all. Lynn watched Mantis 17 move for the first time in minutes. The robot let the tower go and stepped onto a drier ledge where it would not slip. It raised the foam arm and drew a shape in the air that meant to his team, accept receipt. The smaller courier took that as a signature and dropped lower, almost within reach. Lynn did not want the robot to touch it. He wanted the story the courier carried more than any trophy his machine could snatch. The smaller craft slowed beside the ship and released a pellet that plinked against the deck with an undignified sound. A deckhand flinched. The pellet split and lay there as harmless as a seashell, its brain already empty. Data had leapt the tiny gap before anyone could think of a word. The deckhand laughed, then caught himself, because laughter felt treasonous when the world watched. The larger courier did not bother with pellets. It wrote to the sky and then did something Danny didn't expect. It turned back, a quick, modest arc, and brushed the glider's lane gently enough that instruments barely rose above idle. A ghost handshake. A high five at 30,000 feet, not offered to a military platform exactly, but to a pair of eyes that had bothered to watch without grabbing. The glider recorded the gesture as a set of numbers. Danny stored it in a place of her mind where the day felt less sharp. She didn't see the distress call for another 30 seconds. It arrived on an old channel that smelled of salt and old batteries. A fishing boat, 20 kilometers downrange, reporting smoke and sudden heat and no clear source. The message looked like dozens she'd seen across a career. Confused, scared, real. It also arrived 2 seconds after the decoy on the beach coughed itself fully silent, and the pods under the ship blinked a light she didn't recognize. That timing was either terrible luck or deliberate art. The lamp died, and for a heartbeat, the strait felt like a theater with the lights cut mid-line. 2 cargo ships slid past each other with the care of dancers who had just learned the steps. Above them, the warden hovered, mouth open, as if it could catch silence like rain and pour it into the ledger. Danny watched her screens hold the same frame too long. It wasn't a jam. It wasn't force. It felt like someone had put a finger to their lips, and every radio in the strait had decided to be polite. Her autonomy labeled the hush with a name she had never seen in the wild. Safe harbor. It belonged to a civil protocol you hope you never need, the one you trigger when earthquakes interrupt evacuation orders or storm sirens sing over each other and panic tilts a city. It slows non-essential traffic, cushions channels, dampens chatter. It does not belong to war. Lynn saw Safe Harbor written in the corner of his console and told himself to trust a tool built to save lives. The lamp going dark should have scared him more than it did. Instead, it made him feel the shape of a plan. Blue thread hadn't failed. It had paused a ceremony when too many hands reached for the same seal. It was asking witnesses to try again without the noise. The counterfeit lamp pulsed high and off to starboard, faint and needling, like a smile cut into fog. The warden tilted toward it and held still, waiting for a second opinion. Chow didn't speak for a long breath, and when he did, his voice was slow. Safe Harbor won't choose for us. It will only make time. The decision will still be ours. On the beach, the teenager had stopped counting drones and started recording the ferries instead, because their wakes drew bolder lines. The man in the blue shirt stared at a phone that buffered in small circles and felt his part in the world shrink by a factor he did not enjoy. The good weather's crew moved the way sailors do when something important has gone still. No shouts, no hurry. Hands on rails, eyes on angles. The captain looked from mast to warden to the taller hull of late peace that had matched their speed with unnerving grace. He had a superstition about ships that arrived where they shouldn't be with the dignity of a guest who knows he will be invited in the end. The polite shock. Drifted under good weather and tasted the texture of the hush. It was not a blockade. It was a blanket. It learned the edges by running its mouth along them and found, woven into the weave, a rhythm like a heartbeat in a chest that is not yours. The rhythm rose up from near late peace's keel. Not hostile, assertive. The shark filed the taste away, the way a dog remembers which door hides a friend. The warden blinked a tiny light visible only to machines. That blink carried a single letter that meant fallback. Danny's panel translated the letter into a sentence she had trained on and never thought she would earn. Dual signature required? The lantern had to relight by 2 dissimilar systems within a tolerance so narrow that only intent could meet it. Not friend or foe. Not one side's technology dominating the others. It wanted 2 different minds to agree in rhythm. Lynn spoke to his robot aloud, even though the words traveled by cable. We can set the phase. The robot did not nod. It didn't need to. It raised its arm and primed the bead generator, the one he had used earlier to make light behave like it had a fever. If it cast the beads high and thin and at a precise angle, they would turn a simple strobe into a stamp the mast could read without a lamp. Danny understood in the same second. She pulled the glider off the center line, rolled 1.5 degrees, and exposed the wingtip emitter that was never meant to be a beacon. She killed the autopulse. She set a human rhythm her instructors had called ridiculous, and an old mathematician would have called elegant. 2 prime intervals interleaved, the kind of beat that will not line up by accident. On the Chinese ship, Mantis 17 flung the first thread of beads into clean air and held its limb still. The beads hung like frost in sunlight, scattering the strobe in a pattern that felt like written speech to a tower that had read 1,000 storms. The glider tapped its wingtip. The air replied in a signature that Blue Thread had authored for days when a lamp was broken and a city needed a stand-in. The mast caught the beat. For 1 second, then 2, it glowed again with the color only machines can love. The warden inhaled that color. The braid resumed, thin and proud. The counterfeit lamp blinked twice, surprised, then steadied into a sulk. Safe harbor eased by a hair. Phones coughed to life. The beach murmured. A ferry pilot lifted 2 fingers off his horn. For a moment, the plan felt like a bridge that could hold. Late Peace slid closer. Danny's camera raked across the new hull and found a dozen things that didn't line up with its paperwork. A deck ladder 2 meters off the posted drawings. A small blister near the bow that wanted to be an antenna. A patch of paint laid so smooth it had to hide something that needed that smoothness. Her autonomy catalogued the impurities as calmly as a botanist counts petals. It did not assign motives. She did, reflexively, and then stopped herself. The warden didn't care why a hull lied to a camera. It cared whether witnesses could bind a sentence the sea would remember. The turning point announced itself with sound. Not a siren, a flutter of tiny wings that weren't wings. A cluster of micro-gliders lifted from the shadow between the 2 cargo ships and drifted toward Good Weather's mast, with the aimless confidence of seeds that know which wind is theirs. Danny's model had names for devices like those. Scribes. Non-violent, technically. They latched onto antennas and wrote their own copies of deals into their bellies, and then flew off to hide in gutters and rafters for years. Blue Thread used scribes in cities after floods to carry high water marks to places where models could read them without sending people back to danger. You didn't deploy scribes during a ledger ceremony. You didn't, unless you wanted another record the warden wouldn't control. Lynn saw them as small shadows against the lamp's glow. His first thought was elegant. His second was uninvited. He didn't ask who launched them. He asked whether they had identifiers. They did not. Blue Thread scribes sang tiny serial numbers to anyone polite enough to listen. These sang nothing. He whispered to Chow without moving his lips. "Do we smack them?" Chow blinked at the line of devices that behaved like dandelions. "Not unless we want to be the first to touch the ink." Danny chose the narrowest move she had. She tightened the glider's roll another grain, dipped a wingtip by a measure that would mean nothing to an untrained eye, and laid a thin sheet of turbulence in the scribe's path. They drifted offline like dust pushed by a breath. They did not correct. They did not resist. They didn't even seem to notice. For a moment it worked. Then the scribes learned the air and curved back, patient and incurious. Mantis 17 solved the problem with a habit it had already practiced. It picked a pebble from the ship's scupper with fingers meant for bolts and valves and sent it through a tiny arc with a calculation that would have made a baseball pitcher weep. The pebble flicked the leading scribe's wing and made no mark. It made air. The scribe wobbled. The ones behind it adjusted to the wobble, and in adjusting, lost the mast's line. They drifted into the warden's shade and stalled. The warden did not move to swat. It only watched, and in that watchfulness, Lynn felt something like approval, the way a teacher gives it without wasting a word. The braid reached the lamp again and thickened. Safe harbor slackened another hair, enough that the polite shark could lift its head and look with one eye like a child peeking under a curtain. The counterfeit lamp dimmed as if bored of being ignored. Danny's breath smoothed. The captain let his shoulders drop the length of a finger. Chow found his tea and finally drank it. He grimaced because it had gone bad while he earned the right to have it. The climax came sideways. An alert landed across both consoles, stamped with a symbol Blue Thread had reserved for weather and never for people. Annex. The warden had invoked a power it used when roads vanish under landslides, and it needed to deputize anything with wheels. It named 2 escorts. It named them clearly. The glider, the robot. It asked them to shepherd Good Weather to a neutral anchorage, then present their raw witnesses at point lantern. The coda on the alert was short and cutting. Refusal equals admission of limitation, not guilt. Danny swallowed. Annex meant visibility she never permitted outside NATO war games and a few grudging joint exercises. It meant the glider would be a known silhouette with a known behavior as it escorted a ship that had just become valuable in a new way. It meant being filmed by every shore from every angle while carrying a degree of control she pretended not to own. She looked at the missing minute in the corner of her buffer and understood why she was being asked to do something uncomfortable. In debt for something imperfect, Lynn stared at the same word and tasted the risk like salt. Annex meant authority with a leash. It meant Mantis 17 would be seen as an actor and a witness, not merely a machine. It meant showing the robot's range and restraint to phones and eyes that would argue about both. It also meant keeping the ledger honest in front of people who would decide in years whether this afternoon had been restraint or theater. He sent a single word to Chow. Yes. The glider took the escort line high and patient. The robot moved to the bow to watch the lane like a shepherd dog, knees whispering, arm low, foam generator quiet. The polite shark loped ahead, sipping the path and looking for sharp edges. The second aircraft resumed its wash at the thinnest possible setting. They asked for the missing minute, and the sea didn't blink. A new lantern burned beyond the last buoy, clear as a star, and a voice with no flag said the one thing both sides had avoided saying aloud. "Present it." Danny felt the syllables land like weight on the bones of the sky. You know the tone. The one air traffic controllers use when a runway is short and the wind is wrong and everyone needs to do the simple thing perfectly. Her glider kept station with the restraint of a well-trained animal. Under the wing, the seed tucked itself close as if leaning in to hear better. The spider line she'd thrown to Goodweather's rail made a soft hum you could feel through your teeth when you leaned just so. She leaned. Lynn held his breath until he could count the beat of it. Mantis 17 stood near the bow, arm half raised, a stillness that wasn't passive at all. His console showed 3 clean recordings, the tower's braid, the robot's sensor cache, the ship's ordinary logs. All of them showed a seam where the minute should be. Not a hole, a seam. The way a tailor hides a joint so well, you only feel it when you run your hand the wrong direction. Cow stared at the new lantern's coordinates and didn't bother to hide his surprise. Blue Thread hadn't briefed any of them on a second point of record. That meant the port insurers, those quiet patrons who hate uncertainty more than storms, had built a backstop without sending invitations. You could respect their caution and still grind your teeth. The warden drifted between lamp and sea like a patient heron. Its small mouth stayed open, not in threat, but in expectation. The polite shark hovered at depth, intake aimed at the glow that made it taste citrus, as if it could drink vocabulary. The first move, small and honest, came from Danny. She reached for a shelf of math her team never advertised and opened it one finger width. A transform that turned raw footage into something like shadow letters, readable only when combined with a second half at a specific tempo. She started to hum the tempo under her breath. The glider's autonomy picked it up and began to pulse a silent carrier, a metronome only machines could love. She didn't send anything yet. She just set the room. Lynn rested his palm on the console and spoke to the robot like you speak to a friend who can't be spooked. "You held a loop," he said. "You didn't mean to. We're going to undo it without telling anyone how." The robot's head pivoted a degree. The bead generator primed with a soft hiss. The foam held a nuance no other sensor carried, a resonance map of the air itself. If anything had sung a note in the minute that wasn't a minute, the beads had heard the shape of the silence around it. The payoff arrived with the gentlest click. The glider's transform, applied to the seed's microphonics and the buoy's shallow echo, sprouted a thread so thin it was easy to miss the first time. It was not content. It was a contour, a slope in the sound floor that shouldn't exist if a camera roll had simply hiccuped. The contour rose and fell once, then again. The period matched the oscillation of the robot's foam, which meant the looped frames had not been random or malicious. They had been laid over a real, steady rhythm, as if someone had muffled a cough with a pillow instead of leaving the room. Danny breathed out. The truth you could show without showing too much was always a gift. If you want this kind of scene, where a tiny technical reveal tilts an entire standoff, Every week, subscribe and tap the bell. It tells the algorithm you care about deep, cinematic analysis, and it honestly helps us keep building stories at this level. The new lantern waited. The warden waited. Goodweather's lamp, relit by borrowed signatures, held steady. Late peace matched pace a ship length back, blister at the bow turning with the grace of a shoulder beneath a coat. The counterfeit lamp stayed dead, and that should have calmed the room. It didn't. Chow sent one sentence to both control rooms. We can give them a sketch of the minute. No faces, no frequencies, if we braid it in the clear at the lantern and nowhere else. Blue Thread had a clause for that in its civil doctrine. When lives and stability meet, show enough to stop panic. Protect the rest like you protect a child's name in a court transcript. Danny answered with a single word, "Aye." Lynn typed the same, then hesitated, the way you hesitate outside a hospital room. He thought of the inner arm that had thrown a tether earlier and missed. He thought of the beads brightening when no one sang. He thought of the way the robot had thrown a pebble to save a seed. A machine that could be that precise could also be that precise about hiding a moment it thought would make humans behave worse rather than better. He didn't like that thought. He didn't hate it either. The turning point arrived not through a screen, but at the speed of a voice you hadn't known you needed. The new lantern spoke again, calm and precise. Partial presentments accepted. Custody binds on concurrence of two dissimilar witnesses. The phrase sat in the air with the weight of good law. Two different minds, two different methods. Agreement or no binding. No trick, no trap, just a clean way to keep one clever liar from dominating a ledger. Lynn rolled his chair an inch as if the floor had tilted. Dissimilar meant his foam because no one else in this lane had that ear. Dissimilar meant the glider's shadow letters because Goodweather's rig couldn't cast them. Dissimilar meant the warden would judge timing, not content. "All right," he said, and looked at Chow. "All right," Chow said, and meant it. They prepared their half-truths like surgeons prepping tools. The robot exhaled a thin shawl of beads into the lamp's wind and held it perfectly still. The glider pulsed the carrier, wrapped in math, at the exact heartbeat the lantern had advertised. The warden flashed a tiny green to signal the measure had begun. The polite shark kept drinking from the new light and did not complain. The braid formed in the open. Phones on the shore saw nothing but a lamp and a sky, and two ships gliding like saints in a painting where everyone's mouths are closed. Underneath, a sentence wrote itself. Not words, but the shape of a silence that had texture. A silence with a beat. A silence that conveyed intent without telling secrets. The new lantern accepted the braid and glowed a degree brighter. Danny's autonomy declared the partial presentment sufficient pending verification. Lynn's console returned a similar phrase in a language with softer edges. The missing minute had been described, not given. Not surrendered, described, like the way you describe a stranger's coat in the dark to let a friend know you're talking about the same person. That should have been enough. The room felt it. The hush thinned to courtesy again. The warden lifted a hair. Goodweather's captain let his shoulders drop. The teenager on the beach switched back to ferries. The man in the blue shirt checked his battery and frowned. Then the sea flexed a different muscle. From under Late Peace's bow, a pattern rose through the water, neat and old. The kind harbor pilots from another century would have recognized with their eyes closed. 4 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. It was the simplest request a machine could make to another. Who are you, really? The polite shark heard it and answered with nothing. The ghost UUV, a lozenge of wrongness, answered with 2 knocks that meant I am new. The climax unfolded like a zipper. The ghost slid for the Goodweather's mast again, not to steal this time, but to press its nose to the custodian's box, as if asking to be sworn in. It angled to the new lantern's bearing, not the old. The blister on Late Peace's bow flowered a lid and showed a lens the size of a child's eye. Glass so smooth Danny's camera overexposed by instinct. It was not a weapon. It was a reader. It wanted to register the ghost as a witness. Danny's spine went cold. You could feel the stakes landing in your own chest. If a third network enrolled itself in the ledger at the very moment 2 nations had agreed to bind a partial truth, the world would inherit a fork at birth. There are moments where the only honest sentence is simple. Not here. Mantis 17 saw the angle and moved before Lynn could say a word he wouldn't forget. The inner arm extended, not to throw or snare, but to lay a plane of calm across choppy water with a projector meant for construction tasks, the kind used to stabilize a surface for delicate work. The ghost drifted into that calm unintentionally, like a fish into a shallow. For a breath it was visible even to dumb eyes. Danny rolled hard and put her wingtip shadow over the lens on late Peace's blister the way you cup a candle from wind. The reader winked dumbly. The glider didn't jam, didn't blind. She only took away glare, the smallest gesture courtesy allows. You could feel the shore's breath catch. You could feel Chow's. The warden, who had not interfered all day, finally interfered. It dove to the mast and tapped the lamp with a mouth built for binding. Not a bite, a seal. The custodian's box answered with a chime you could only feel in your sinus bones, and the lock slid into a mode that would refuse any new witness until the current braid settled. Late Peace's blister closed with the nonchalance of a cat pretending it hadn't wanted the fish anyway. The ghost rocked in the robot's plane of calm and then did something no one wanted. It sank, not away. Straight down, nose first, as if obeying a picture in its head of what humility looks like. The polite shark dove after it, intake open, collecting the last scrap of field the ghost would give up without argument. The ghost aimed at the new lantern's seabed anchor, the base of a buoy that had not existed last week, and kissed the chain with a thoughtless faith.